Alright, everybody. I told you guys I was going to come give you the real news, the real answer to what happened to the young lady, Teresa Halbech, in Making of a Murderer. So, here's the first couple things you need to know. Number one is, regardless of who killed her, the judicial system in that county and the state of Wisconsin failed these two individuals. To convict someone with so little real hard evidence is a mockery of the court system in itself. Uh, but anywho, regardless of that and the poor decisions made by the court to appoint not only Bobby Dassey's, Brendan Dassey, his public defender, was atrocious. But anyhow, I'm going to get to who actually committed this crime. If you go back through the episodes, through the videos, you'll be able to pick up on a few key things that I'm going to bring up, which any smart person would have picked up on in the beginning, and you would realize that the actual killers basically told on themselves, and the prosecution realized it at certain moments in the trial and would not let them continue talking. So the first thing I'm going to bring up is that out of everyone involved in the situation, between her roommate, her ex-boyfriend, her brother, Stephen, Brendan, everyone involved, there's only two individuals who don't really have an airtight alibi. And that's because they are each other's alibi. And that's Scott and Bobby Dassey. Scott being Brendan Dassey's quote-unquote stepdad, mom's boyfriend. These two individuals, which it's known that pretty much everyone in the Avery family has a subpar IQ. So assume when they speak that they're trying to sound as smart as possible. However, when these two individuals give their alibi, they both use the same story. Here's why. In order to do what they needed to do, they A, needed the cover of darkness, and they B, needed to be able to make sure they were camouflaged in order to move and maneuver where they needed to go and to do what they needed to do. The best way to do that is to wear hunting clothes, obviously. Number two, you're talking about Christmas. You're talking about Halloween. Excuse me, not Christmas. You're talking about Halloween in the state of Wisconsin. It's pretty cold. So obviously, that's something else. If they're going to go do this, they need to be well insulated, well covered up. Okay? So on top of that, that's why the hunting defense for them works. Because if they get spotted out, they can say, I'm either coming back from hunting or I'm going hunting. Where their alibi doesn't fit, and where the investigator should have picked up on it, is because these two guys make a claim that they pass each other going hunting. Now, where do they both live? They both live in the same trailer. So if on the same day, two guys from the same trailer are leaving to go hunting at various times throughout the day, they're not going to pass each other on the main road coming away from their property. They're going to be driving the same direction. So you're not going to pass each other at any point in time. You're going to leave your property, go out to the highway, then get to the main highway, and go to where you're going. You're not going to pass somebody who's leaving from the same place you are, whether it's an hour later or 2 hours later. You're not going to pass each other. And these guys talk about passing each other around 5:30. It's incredible to me that nobody picked up on that. How do two people who live in the same trailer pass each other going out hunting? I find it hard to believe, with the river so close to their property, that these two guys were going to hunt in complete opposite directions to the point that they passed each other on their route. Seems crazy to me. But that's the first thing that let me know these two guys can't be trusted and their alibi is paper thin at best. The second thing is, you'll notice in the video that Scott gets asked by the defense, isn't it true multiple people have said you have been trying to sell a .22 caliber rifle? His response was, no. Why would multiple people say you had been readily, expeditiously trying to get rid of a rifle, which just happens to be the same caliber of bullet that killed Miss Halbech? And the defense knows that that rifle was given to you by Stephen Avery, which is the quote-unquote same rifle that always stood above his bed but now wasn't there. So when that happens, basically he says no. The defense really isn't allowed to go any further, and it ends there. But we now have one of the gentlemen who's a part of the shakiest alibi, who now has in his possession and is trying to get rid of a .22 caliber firearm. Same round that was used to kill her. Thirdly, if Stephen Avery really had done this, he had the run of the mill of a place where he knew where everything was. He knew where everything was. He lived there his entire life. He had the crusher, he had the incinerator, he had all that. Why would he, if he was criminal mastermind enough to wipe down his garage to the point where no DNA could be found, or clean up this mattress, or none of her DNA be on his mattress, in his house, at all, if he can do all this, why would he be so messy as to burn a body in a barrel, then take those body parts, and then bring them to a bonfire that everyone is standing around during his regular Halloween bonfire? It doesn't make sense. But it does make sense that Scott, who hadn't really known anything about the junk business, he's just somebody's boyfriend, in a sense, doesn't really know how to work any of that machinery. And then you have Bobby Dassey, who has the run of the mill of the Avery farm, but he doesn't really know how to run any of that stuff either. But he does know the best location to put a vehicle on the farm so it doesn't get found for a while. So now they take it after a couple days in the night. They take it and set it on that farm. Now, here's where it gets sketchy, because those two guys weren't smart enough to come up with that plan to frame Stephen Avery on their own. And here's where it gets real. What happened was, Colburn, if you notice, radios in to with the tag number and confirms by saying, oh, it's a green Toyota RAV4. The lady on the dispatch says yes. Why did he do that? Because he knew that was the car of the missing girl, and he saw Bobby Dassey driving it. So he pulls Dassey over and he says, Bobby, do you know you're driving the car of a girl who's missing? And then it clicks in his head. These guys have done something wrong. But these aren't the Avery. This isn't the guy that we want to do something wrong. Because Link, Colburn, and everyone else involved has been trying to figure out a way to get Stephen Avery back locked up. If you notice, once the lawsuit came out, several members of his family started being arrested for various things, including Scott and Bobby Dassey. So now you have a great opportunity for Colburn, Link, and everyone involved. Because we can tell Bobby, look, we understand what you guys did, but here's the deal. Not only are we going to let you off with this, you're going to help us, and we're going to make sure that the cops don't bother you guys again. Because we're going to get Stephen Avery and his circus and his fiasco out of your lives forever. Here's what we need you guys to do. Tell us what you did with her and the body, and we'll tell you how you can help us. Hence the phone call later from an officer that says, the boss needs us to do something different tonight. Because what that different was go back with the help of Brendan, excuse me. I get so confused with these names. But Bobby and the help of Scott and the other officers, they set the car up in such a way that it could easily be found by anybody starting to search that certain area of the property. 2, the officers go back with them and collect all these things, these bones out of this barrel, then transport them to the burn pile, which you heard the specialist in the video say that these bones were and possibly could have been moved. So she wasn't burned in that giant bonfire burn pile, which they had on Halloween anyway. Which also explains the fact that she wasn't ever killed in his garage. There's no way for him to clean that up, because she was killed off-site by Bobby and Scott. Then with the help of the officers, wiped down, cleaned down, then the blood planted. True, some of her blood was in the back of the car, but that's because that's how they transported her body back over there so they could burn it in the first place. Then they rode around in her car so nobody could find it. So now you have the police get involved, knowing who the real murderers are, but everybody gets their story straight so that they can manipulate it, so that they can, one, go tell the searchers, hey, we think you should search this section of property. And they made sure that they got a family member to find it, because it was that lady's first time even going out. And they made sure that they picked her to find it because it's the only person they gave a camera to that day. And they knew that she would be highly emotional and believable once the call came in and once she told that story. Because if any of the other cops find it, it looks too sketchy, and they're going to say, well, of course, Manitowoc County cops found it. So they made sure, with the help of the boyfriend and everybody else, that they said, hey, I want you to find someone close to the family, and we want you guys to personally go search this section of the property because it's important. And that's what they did. The cops were very smart. Link and all those guys, they all have degrees. They all have worked in law enforcement so long, they know exactly what to do and how to do it. So what you then have is the guilty parties Bobby and Scott now working with the officers, which is why we never heard a word from them until we saw them at the trial. There's also the case of the officers could not let any of Bobby and Scott's DNA be found at the crime scene. Because when we go back to when Colburn radios the call in and sees the car driving around, who's driving it? In the beginning, I thought it would probably be Bobby, the younger of the two. Then it dawned on me. It was Scott. Here's why. He was driving that vehicle. His DNA was in that vehicle. There's only one person that lived on that property that did not get a DNA swab done. And you know who that was? Scott. Because if he had, it would have pointed every finger to him being in that vehicle and not Steve. Which they knew, which is why they said, we can't have them swabbing the steering wheel. We got to give them blood. If we put blood in the vehicle, that's what they'll go to first. They won't need anything else. A fingerprint or a smudge of DNA or a tiny particle of skin, that's too hard. Blood, it's real easy. And it's going to be there and it's going to be found. And that's it. So that's why, and that's another bit of evidence that you really don't that really doesn't get pushed or brought to light, because this guy lives on the same property in the same trailer that's a few hundred feet away from Brendan Dassey, who they say committed the crime, yet how come this guy didn't get swabbed? And he didn't get swabbed because the cops knew if he did, their whole jig would be up. If you look at Link and you look at Colburn and the rest of the guys from Manitowoc County involved, they are so nervous the entire trial because all it takes is one slip up from a couple not real intelligent individuals and the whole thing is blown out of proportion. Which is why you have Faustberger and everyone else say, put her in his garage, because she was never there. So they had no choice but to try to put her in the garage, which is why Link is the one that always discovers the bullet fragments and the lanyard after he gets these things from Scott and Bobby Dassey. So it took me 2-3 days of thinking about it. I was making notes on my phone after a while trying to figure this out, and this is the conclusion that I came to. I think I could build a better case strictly off the videos they showed with the little physical evidence they showed and the lack of an alibi for these two individuals, and they both admit to seeing her on the property, being there at the same time with her, which also means they were able to leave right after she left. To me, there's a much stronger case for these two guys to commit this crime. So, back to, phone call came. So, there's so much more evidence that points to these two individuals committing this crime, even more so than Stephen and Brendan Dassey. Um, you guys watch it, take it for what it is. I could be 100% wrong, but I feel like the evidence points more towards these two guys and the fact that they have access to the property, but they don't really know how to get rid of a body, and they don't know that there's things on the property that can help them get rid of, the body in a better manner. Um, so they kind of messed up a little bit, and the cops helped them create what they needed to create in order to frame Steven. So, uh, you know, sorry, video's like 20 minutes long, um, but I feel like I'm onto something. I feel like this dude should get at least uh, a retrial, both of them, and I feel like his defense probably knows what we all know. They just weren't allowed to produce those things out in the trial because they were fighting so much um, that they really didn't have time. And I don't think the jury deliberated long enough either, but that's a whole nother story. But this is my 2 cents. Uh, if you watch it, cool, I appreciate it. You know, if you agree with me, great. If you don't, that's great too. I'd love to hear somebody else's theory. So, holla.